Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, John, for that introduction. I appreciate it. I actually got promoted in March 2013. So I've been a long, 2003 was a little while ago. I don't think they would have probably booted me out after 10 years as an OnStar. But good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be here on behalf of the 460,000 soldiers and airmen of the National Guard. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak here at this this conference. I want to start off, I'm going to find the button here. I want to start off talking a little bit about our organization and how we represent the Army National Guard in our nation. The National Guard's been around longer than the nation itself. We trace our roots back to the militia of the original 13 colonies, all the way back to 1636. As a state-based force, we're in all 50 states, as well as Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia. However, as the National Guard, we're also a federal combat reserve. We supply the Army and the Air Force with combat-ready soldiers and airmen. We've done this for every one of America's major wars, and we are doing it today in Afghanistan and around the world. A lot has changed since 2001. The Department of Homeland Security didn't exist. Katrina was years away, and the National Guard was not an operational force as it is today. We were more of a strategic reserve, and we were still trying to adjust to the end of the Cold War. Everything changed for us, like much of the nation, after 9/11. The decade following 9/11 was a crucible from which the National Guard transformed into the best trained, best equipped, and most experienced force in our history. We've taken what we've learned over the past decade of combat operations and applied it to how we do business here at home. There we go. I'd like to give you a quick overview of how we operate at home. Remember, we're primarily a state-based force. If we aren't deployed overseas, our people and our equipment are available to the governors to use under the state command and control. With rare exceptions, we are not in charge at any domestic scene. We are simply one piece of a complex response, often involving multiple agencies in multiple jurisdictions. We are there to support, not to direct. One of the concepts I'd like to just quickly touch upon is unity of effort. That's what I mean is everybody moving towards one common purpose, whether it's in combat or domestic operations. Getting to that objective is difficult, especially in a combat environment, and through those experiences and in training in the real world, we get good at working together to reach that objective. That's why over the past 10 years it's been so important to us when it comes to domestic response. A lot of people ask what does combat and overseas training and exercise have to do with disasters, and that is we use the skills and equipment developed in combat and during our federal missions, coordinating large groups of people from different countries and services, operating in harsh environments, using our communications, our mission command, and our transportation, all to do those things that we do while we're deployed, and they're the mirror of what we do at home. We use that capability, that mission command, that equipment, the communications technology, the federal mission that comes to the National Guard to allow us to better able to respond in domestic emergencies. That's what we bring to the table when we're deployed in our states and supporting the domestic emergencies and homeland response missions that we have. I want to, okay, come on. There we go. One slide behind, I apologize, I'm figuring out how to use this button.
That was kind of tricky.
Oh, okay, good. It's not just me. I want to talk a little bit about this slide here because it kind of shows who we are as a National Guard. We are a community-based force. We are located in over 3,000 communities in every state and territory of the country. This means a few things. First, it means when disasters strike at home, it's almost always impacts a guardsman directly, and if it doesn't impact them personally, it impacts somebody that they know. It also means we're forward deployed. We don't have to find equipment or people from across the country or a base somewhere, an active duty post, and then move to the scene of the disaster or the emergency. We're already there. My boss, Lieutenant General Ingram, likes to say, we respond before the wind stops blowing. Our folks will self-mobilize before they receive orders, and have done that. When something bad happens, they get their equipment, head to the armories, pack up, and then are prepared to move out. They do this because they're eager to serve, and they know what their duty is to be ready to respond as quickly as possible. Speed is life in an emergency. I talk about our overseas, our federal mission, our combat reserve mission that both the Air and the Army Guard has. But I want to show you this slide because a lot of folks are surprised at just how busy the National Guard is overseas and involved in operations around the globe. On any given day in the past year, we've had somewhere between 26 and 36,000 Army and Air Guardsmen and women on orders in overseas missions. Combat, humanitarian assistance, multinational training exercises, and in support of special operations forces around the world. We have teams in the Horn of Africa, the Sinai, and then obviously in Afghanistan. We still support the mission in Bosnia and Kosovo with mobilized soldiers. So around the world, we still have National Guardsmen continuing to serve in overseas operations. And again, why is that important? It's important because the National Guard is critical to our national security. We haven't gone to war without the National Guard, and we probably won't in the future. Where this has relevance in domestic missions and domestic support is that our overseas experience, that the men and women in the Guard, they bring back these tools, experiences, this equipment that allows us to respond in domestic missions in a more robust manner. We bring this expertise and the capabilities of the nation's military to bear in face of catastrophes nearly every day, and as you'll see on the next slide, around the country. Now this slide might be hard for you to read depending on where you're sitting, but I'm often, when I mention that people are surprised, they really are, just how often the National Guard's used around our own country. It's not just the big events that we're used for, the Katrinas, the Sandys, floods, fires, tornadoes, earthquakes, but every day somewhere in the country there is a National Guardsman on duty serving in their community or supporting civilian authorities. Just to give you some perspective, in 2013, the Army Guard performed over 130 major domestic operations, with Guardsmen serving more than 387,000 duty days here at home. Every state, with the exception of Guam, called out the National Guard at least once in 2013. And it's just not the state missions that we perform at home. We also perform Homeland Defense missions under the control of the federal government. Most people don't know, for instance, we provide ballistic missile defense for our nation since 2003. Or that on 9/11 and for the years thereafter, the Air Guard has provided fighter jets in patrolling over the skies of major cities. Most people don't know that for years we've supported DEA and counter-drug efforts, the Customs and Border Patrol monitoring the southwest border between the U.S. and Mexico, and are surprised to learn that we are at every major national security event, like the Democratic and Republican conventions, G8 and NATO summits, the presidential inauguration, and even the Super Bowl. Go Bills. Any Buffalo fans here? No? Okay. All right, go Bills. Probably one of the strongest and most unique capabilities we have is in the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear high-yield event, explosive event capability that the National Guard brings. The National Guard is equipped to be the military's first responder for a seaborne event. We have full-time specialized teams designed to identify these threats, provide life-saving treatment and decontamination, and help civilian authorities get back on their feet. All of these packages have specialized teams, from civil support teams to the Seaburn Enhanced Response Force package, and then the Homeland Response Forces are available to local authorities every day. In 2012 alone, we conducted over 1,700 responses, standby, and assist missions. And as we saw in the Boston Marathon bombing, they were on the ground ready to go in the face of a potential Seaburn incident. However, it's not the training and capabilities and equipment that make these teams most effective. It's the constant relationship building with local, state, and federal agencies through exercises, planning meetings, and conferences like this. And as you can see from the next slide, some real-world successes is dependent on this close integration. One of the exercises I want to talk about is Operation Phalanx on the southwest border. Close integration with state, local, and federal authorities on the southwest border between Mexico and the U.S. And it's called Operation Phalanx. Beginning in 2010, National Guard has supported DHS, CBP, and ICE in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, in aerial detection and monitoring missions along the border. Now, it might be hard for you to see, but we have assisted these agencies in the apprehension of nearly 75,000 people, turned back nearly 30,000 people at the border, and assisted in the seizure of 250,000 pounds of marijuana and over 200 pounds of cocaine since 2010. The takeaway here is that we can work very closely together. And I'm, as John mentioned earlier, I was the chief of aviation for about 3 years, so I put together this plan to put aviation on the border. It started out with over 1,000 soldiers on the border in manned observation posts, physically on the ground. And then we, over a period of time, we adjusted and we were requested to provide an aerial capability because it actually reduced the cost to the DoD and DHS and CBP. So we put together a 22-ship aviation detachment that we put in Texas and Arizona and a little bit in New Mexico to help CBP with their aerial detection and monitoring. And so we went from over 1,000 soldiers to less than 300. Air Guard provided an aviation platform. Our aircraft, which have been newly fielded to the Army National Guard, the UH-72 Lakota, in our security and support battalions, provided these packages of aircraft that have EOIR cameras, multi-channel radios that communicate with law enforcement, as well as a night sun spotlight and a capability to provide video downlink to mission commanders, CBP folks on the ground to give them real-time information and data. So that's been a very successful operation. We were asked to stay on for 1 year. That extended to a second year, 2013, and right now we're planning to continue the mission on into 2014. So it's been an outstanding mission for minimal support costs, and I'll tell you that the 300 soldiers and airmen are on this mission are all volunteers, and they volunteered now almost going on 3 years. They're leaving their civilian jobs and spending a month or 2 months on the border in a volunteer status to support this mission. We haven't had to federalize anybody, we haven't had to activate anybody, but we've used our soldiers and our aircraft that are in these S&S battalions around the country and brought them to Texas and Arizona and have employed them under the command and control of these S&S battalions. So it's been a terrific multi-agency, multi-state, National Guard, DoD operation that has been very successful. Talk a little bit about Hurricane Sandy. Everybody remembers that. It was a significant event in the Northeast. What most folks don't realize is the National Guard mobilized soldiers and airmen from 19 states within 24 hours to help out the 11 states that were initially affected, and where those 11 states are home to 1/3 of our population of our nation. The area was affected by hurricane-force winds, river and coastal flooding, power loss, and if you were in West Virginia, you had a heck of a snowstorm that shut down power and roads, among other calamities and issues. I'd like to talk at length about the incredible dedication shown by our National Guardsmen from saving children and elderly folks from rising floodwaters and evacuating hospitals, delivering food and water, providing emergency power. But unfortunately, I don't have the time today because I could tell you a lot of stories about the successes of our soldiers and airmen, the mission command that was employed. But I want to point out two things. that made Sandy's response so successful from a big picture perspective. One is the interagency and interdepartment coordination made a huge difference. And second was the skills that we brought and the equipment that we brought from our federal mission that enabled us to set up fuel points, got food and water going, brought emergency power, and again, talking a little bit about aviation. What we did, again, as the aviation chief for the Bureau at the time, we brought in almost 245 aircraft from around the Northeast that weren't directly affected. And so New York and New Jersey had their own aviation in those states, but we brought an additional 245 aircraft and crews that were available. Additionally, we provided a 12 aircraft to FEMA to use to bring in their urban search and rescue teams and their command and control elements and move them throughout New Jersey, New York, and Staten Island. So it was an incredible operation across the board. And again, I will tell you, having been in New York previously, we had many and developed with the state emergency management folks at that time. We continued to be worried about a hurricane that would hit New York City and Long Island. They had Long Island had a hurricane, I think it was in '36, that was pretty devastating. And so we had spent a lot of time when I was in the state developing plans to respond to a hurricane event or a nor'easter in a Long Island area. So we worked with SEMO, the folks on Long Island, Staten Island, the New York City emergency management folks, and had several exercises over the years, and that paid huge dividends when the hurricane actually, when we knew the hurricane was going to come up the coast and strike in the New York, New Jersey area. We had already established the relationships. We'd already had contingency plans developed, and then it was just a matter of executing and or adjusting as the situation unfolded. One of the interesting things about Sandy is it's the first time that we pre-planned and had integrated what we call the dual status commander. We've had dual status commanders. Normally they've been reactively activated, but in this case it was a pre-planned event. And what the dual status command allows for is the National Guard forces under the command of the governors and the federal forces under the authority of the president to be commanded by one single officer, that unity of effort topic and objective that I spoke of. That commander, the dual-headed commander, is appointed under an agreement between the Secretary of Defense and the governor of the state. In the case of Sandy, the commanders received direction from both NORTHCOM, the federal combatant command responsible for the mainland U.S., and from the state governor where they were operating. The dual status commanders, Brigadier General Mike Bobeck, a good friend of mine in New York, and Brigadier General James Grant in New Jersey, led Army and Air Guard forces operating in that state, in their state statuses, as well as active duty Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force personnel, as well as units from the U.S. Army Reserve, all which responded and served in a federal status to that emergency. We found, generally speaking, this setup allows for better command and control and greater clarity among our soldiers, airmen, and civilian authorities. The Massachusetts Guard every year supports the Boston Marathon. They usually provide traffic control, area security, and standby civil support team at the races. This familiarity, the exercises, and the previous experience and the relationships paid dividends this year. Guard soldiers were right there at the scene of the bombing site. They provided immediate life-saving care. The CST that was assigned to that event assessed the area to determine if chemical agents had been used in that bombing. Guardsmen assisted local law enforcement in establishing a security perimeter and traffic control, supported law enforcement while searching for the bombing suspects, and in fact, armed National Guard military policemen in state active duty used armored Humvees to facilitate the tactical movement of law enforcement. 250 guardsmen were at the marathon providing support prior to the bombing. We searched over 1,200 guardsmen afterwards. This is a great example of having guardsmen and women involved in big events where it can pay dividends if something goes wrong. Not only do we provide the capability to assist local authorities in preventing tragedies, but should something occur, we're right there ready to respond immediately. I want to talk a little bit about the California rimfire because we're talking a little bit about technology here, and this is really a great example of bringing the full capabilities of the U.S. military to serve the nation here at home. One of these areas we're most excited in is our unmanned aviation capabilities. The California rimfire, which was recently contained, was one of the largest wildfires in California history. It burned over 400,000 acres, destroyed homes, and caused severe soil erosion damage to the watersheds that supply drinking water to San Francisco and other California cities. CAL FIRE and U.S. Forest Service requested help in fighting this forest fire. Ground, aviation, air guard assets in the form of C-130 MAF tankers and Army National Guard helicopters providing water buckets were mobilized to assist CAL FIRE and the Forest Service, as well as the state and federal agencies. One of the newest capabilities was brought to bear, and that was the MQ-1 Predator. We used the Predator for the first time to provide real-time imagery to fire commanders on the ground. The aircraft flew over 20 hours at the time, much of it much longer than the manned aircraft. We've used these UH-72 Lakotas with the EOIR cameras before in other fires, but obviously, you know, we've got about a 2.5 hour bag of gas on board, so it limits our time over the area that needs to be observed. And so this, the use of the Predator or the unmanned aerial vehicle allowed us to provide that persistent stare for the firefighting incident commander to be able to spot hot spots, look at where the fire is, and then direct the ground response firefighting teams to that fire. So it was a bargain in terms of cost, and in terms of what it costs for a manned aircraft. We're pretty excited about this capability to use unmanned aerial systems in domestic operations, where commanders and civilian leaders need a cost-effective, highly capable airborne platform to provide situational awareness. When combined with our other firefighting capabilities, as I said, the MAFs and the helicopters with water buckets, it's clear that we're going to continue to play a growing role, a strong role, supporting civilian leaders in wildfires. Talk a little bit about the Colorado floods. One of our largest current operations still going. We have engineers still in Colorado helping to where we can to rebuild some roads and provide at least temporary measures until Colorado brings in contractors and their Department of Highways in to rebuild the roads and bridges. As you all know, that the flood devastated the areas in and around Boulder. The National Guard evacuated over 3,400 people. 22 had to be rescued by helicopters. And I talked earlier about either a guardsman's affected or they know somebody that was. My daughter goes to CU Colorado in Boulder, and her house where roommates were in flooded, and she had to be evacuated and brought to a shelter for a couple of days. So it does affect all of us, and to be more specific, I was a little worried about her over those couple of days. We transported 39 tons of cargo, including food and water, plus provided engineer support for clearing roads and restoring bridges. Another example of where the National Guard working closely with the state, the local governments at all levels to provide the support and capability needed to save lives and property. Because we constantly train, exercise, and perform real-world missions, both at home and abroad, we are better prepared when disaster strikes at home. I want to finish up and then open up for some questions. You know, we still have gaps. Responding to emergencies is no easy undertaking, and as you well know, there's a phrase out there: no plan survives first contact. And it's certainly true when it comes to emergencies and emergency response, homeland security, and civil support. And so I want to outline a few areas where we can continue to improve and need some help. First is that interoperability is critical to our readiness. Our radios have to talk to each other. We need to train, exercise, and plan together. We need to advance and invest in advanced technologies that allows us to share a common operating picture. You know, some of our capabilities in Mission Command that have been developed for the military over the past 10 years far and exceeds the capability that some of the states and local governments have. So when we can share that and bring that in with them, or they have that, then it makes us much more capable and provide that unity of effort. We are very good at being able to put video on a brigade commander or division commander's desk or in front of their TOC, but not so much to get it in front of the governor or the state emergency manager because of our systems and our ability to talk and get across the internet. So we got to continue to work on that. It's critical for interoperability and emergency response. We need to take a look at the lessons from 9/11 in terms of, you know, the police couldn't talk to the fire couldn't talk to the police, and that was an illustrative lesson. When we responded to Hurricane Katrina in 2005, I went down there with aircraft from New York, and we got into Mississippi, and you know, all the lights were out. There were no cell phone towers. We had operations going on in Gulfport. We had operations in New Orleans. Because of the lack of capability to sustain our aircraft, we were 150 miles to the north. We had no way to talk to initially to the folks, the local and state folks that were in the Gulfport, Mississippi area. So, you know, until mobile cell phone towers were put in place, so we had to put teams on the ground with military radios that allowed us to communicate via either satellite or SATCOM, and then some long-range radio capability that we brought as a military into the firehouses and the local communities there so we could communicate. So we need to continue to invest in our communications capability. Lives are really, truly in the balance. I mean, we need to fix this. I mean, speed matters when it comes to saving lives. Secondly, we need to lean forward and embrace new technology and capabilities. We need to integrate those into our planning and execution. We need to welcome new capabilities such as the unmanned aerial system, getting the regulatory environment right to allow us to employ those systems, making sure not only we within the Department of Defense have the right processes, procedures, and policies in place, but also working the interagency aspect with the FAA and the local and state level to be able to employ that system. The Army Guard has 28 small tactical UAV systems, the Shadow, spread around the country. I mean, we can move them in a truck very quickly to a location that needs that system, and again provide that persistent stare capability to an incident commander on the ground to give him or her that ability to see the situation and direct a response force or capability to help solve the problem. The time to discuss with the FAA is now, not after or while we're trying to do that event. We are, the Army Guard and the Air Guard are moving into the cyber world. We're standing up some cyber protection teams over the next couple of years. And that role is emerging. We're working with the Army Cyber Command and U.S. Cyber Command to identify that role and mission, but we're bringing on soldiers now. I participated in a cyber shield exercise a month ago and went down to visit our soldiers during this exercise. And I got to tell you, I mean, I thought I was pretty technically savvy, but I had some young men and women, airmen and guardsmen, Army guardsmen. I talked to this one soldier, first lieutenant, 26-ish, working on her doctorate for computer skills, computer science, and they told me what they were doing, and I was sitting there and I kind of remembered back 30 years ago when I was trying to teach my dad how to program a VCR because he wanted to watch Rockford Files. And he looked at me and, like, you know, I was speaking Greek, and I felt that same way when these young men and women were trying to explain to me what they were doing in cyber protection. And it's an amazing and necessary critical skill set that we need to invest in time and effort because there's a lot of things out there that we need to be worried about. Finally, in order for a National Guard to remain effective as a force, we need to be integrated in real-world operations. We need to be modernized with the most advanced equipment that we can afford. We cultivate relationships, learn lessons from real-world experiences as Guardsmen deploy. We need to train adaptive leaders in this complex world. We have to be responsive both here at home and globally. We need to be ready and modernized. And finally, we need to be committed to our profession, which, Army and Air across the board. And we need to develop and continue to develop personal and interpersonal relationships. Planning, exercises, events like these afford us the opportunity to work together, to develop relationships so that when we show up to an emergency or a scene, an incident scene, that friendly and familiar face goes a long way to establishing that unity of effort that we need to provide relief and support to our citizens. I hope I was able to shed a little bit of light on the National Guard, did a little bragging as well. Our goal is to continue to bring to the table our capabilities and be able to build these strong relationships not only at the local level, the state level, the federal level, interagency, and to do what's right for the American people, to respond and to serve our communities across the nation. That completes my prepared remarks. I'm open for some questions. I think I've got a couple minutes to do that. Thank you very much.